That's Eulalia PERIS from the European Environment Agency, and she's an environmental noise expert. So please, Eulalia, the microphone is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to present in the UIC Railway Noise Days. For the ones who don't know the European Environment Agency, the overall mission of the agency is to provide information about the environment for different kinds of audiences. And the agency's work on noise is focused on helping to implement the Environmental Noise Directive. So we collect all the information that countries have to report under the Environmental Noise Directive. And with this information, we evaluate the situation at the European level on noise pollution, and we produce a number of reports and assessments based on this data. So yeah, my presentation today is focused on the assessment that we did for the data received in the third round of noise mapping. And this information was actually compiled into a report called Environmental Noise in Europe Report 2020. And that was published on 5th of March 2020, just yeah, a few days before the general lockdown. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. And the next slide, please. Thank you. So I would like to start with a brief context on the Environmental Noise Directive. So everybody is familiar with the available European data on noise. And I think it is also important to understand the data that we have on noise that has been used in our assessments. So the directive obliges countries to submit noise data for the sources and noise reporting thresholds that you can see in the slide, and this is done every 5 years. And I would like to highlight that not all the roads, railways, and airports, or even cities are covered in the directive. So for instance, only cities larger than 100,000 inhabitants are considered, and also roads, railways, and airports outside urban areas that have a certain traffic flow are considered. Yeah, and I also would like to highlight that we only have data from 55 decibel LDN and 50 decibel LNIght, as those are the reporting thresholds set up in the directive. So finally, apart from submitting noise data, countries also have to draw action plans to address noise problems that they identify from the noise mapping. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So apart from the reporting obligations set up in the Environmental Noise Directive, in 2014, a non-binding obligation on noise was established under the 7th Environmental Action Program to 2020. And the objective was that by 2020, noise pollution in the EU needs to be significantly decreased, moving closer to the WHO recommended levels. And well, it was not really specified to which levels they refer to, as at that time there were different kind of WHO noise guidelines. However, since the publication of the 2018 WHO guidelines on environmental noise, it is clear which are the recommended levels for each source of noise. And as you can see, also the recommended levels fall below the reporting thresholds of the noise directive. Next slide, please. So having made this short introduction, I will now move into the key findings of the report. And although I will be focusing on the different sources of noise captured under the END, I also try to include some more details for railway noise, as I'm aware this workshop is about railway noise. So next slide, please. So one of the most important key findings of the report is that environmental noise, and in particular road traffic noise, is a major environmental problem in Europe. We estimate that 20% of the EU population live in areas where noise levels are considered harmful to health, meaning that at least 20% of the population live in areas above the WHO recommendations. And that percentage is even higher if we looked only at urban areas. Next slide, please. So in this slide, it can be seen the different sources of noise and the number of people that are affected by levels above the END thresholds. So it clearly can be seen that the main source of noise is road traffic, and the areas most affected are urban areas. Next slide, please. So specifically for railway, we estimate that there are 21 million people exposed to 55 decibel LDN and 17 million exposed to 50 decibel L-night. And as it can be seen, railway is the second most significant source of noise, but it is much less than for road traffic noise. So something to note is that railway noise is particularly relevant at night. And as you can see, there is not so much difference between the number of affected people during the day, evening, night period and the nighttime period. And that contrarily to road noise, where you can see that there is a much higher number of people affected in urban areas compared to non-urban areas, for railway, it can be seen that the number of people affected is more evenly spread between the urban and the non-urban areas. Next slide, please. So going a bit more into detail on noise inside urban areas, we see also that in most countries, a large number of inhabitants within urban areas are exposed to road noise levels of 55 decibels or higher during the day, evening, night period. Next slide, please. So this graph shows the percentage of the population inside urban areas in each country that is exposed to different noise bands, starting at 55 decibel LDN. And well, we are aware that there are some comparability issues between countries due to the use of different noise mapping methodologies. So some countries map all the streets in the cities and some others only map the buses. But however, despite of these methodological differences, I think the main message that these graphs gives us is that most of the countries have a high number of people exposed to road traffic noise in urban areas. And therefore, the data shows us that road traffic noise in urban areas is not a problem of only one or few countries or few cities, but it's a one in Europe. For instance, countries have at least
Eulalia, can you hear me?
WHO recommendation. Oh,
Eulalia,
yes.
I'm very
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you. It just, we have a bit of disconnection problem. It's very like couple of seconds. I think what you were saying, it was clear, but maybe just in case I can ask you to repeat it once again.
If the connection is bad, I can turn off my video if that helps.
Well, no, it's okay.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
So,
thank you.
Yes. So, for instance, all countries have at least 20% of their urban population exposed to levels above 55 decibel LDN, which is a level already above the WHO recommendations. And more than half of the countries have 40% of their urban population exposed to those unhealthy noise levels. Next slide, please. So here you can see the same graph, but for population exposed to rail and air traffic noise inside urban areas. So what we see here, as opposed to road traffic noise, is that population exposure to rail or air traffic noise are perhaps more localized issues and depend on whether urban areas in a country have trams or railways as a mean of public transport or have big airports close to urbanized areas. Next slide, please. So using the population exposure data available, we also did some estimations to quantify the health impacts from environmental noise. We estimate that there are 22 million highly annoyed due to environmental noise, 6.5 million highly sleep disturbed, and we estimate that there are 48,000 new cases of ischemic heart disease a year and 12,000 premature deaths due to environmental noise. In addition, we estimate that there are more than 12,000 children that suffer cognitive impairment due to aircraft noise. So we can say that environmental noise affects millions of people in Europe and it's causing significant public health impacts. And obviously, because there are so many more people exposed to road traffic noise, consequently, most of these health effects occur inside urban areas, with road traffic noise being by far the largest contributor. Next slide, please. So in this slide, I pulled together the estimated health impacts for railway. Railway noise is the second most significant source impacting the health of the population, but it is much less than for road traffic noise. And what we see is that railway noise is particularly relevant at night, and therefore there are a significant number of people sleep disturbed due to railway noise. Next slide, please. And as you can see here, the estimated number of people exposed to different noise sources of noise for the 3 rounds of noise mapping. There are some comparability issues between the years, especially between 2007 and the other years, because there were different reporting obligations. And also there may be some comparability issues between 2012 and 2017, because some countries have not been consistent with the calculation method used. Next slide, please. But looking globally between 2012 and 2017, we can see that the number of people affected has remained stable and that the number of people exposed to levels above 55 decibel L-band has not significantly decreased for any of the sources. Therefore, the 7 EAP objective of reducing noise pollution by 2020 and moving closer to the WHO recommended levels has not really been achieved. And well, we hope that in the new ATAP, noise will be taken into account and the objectives for noise will be a little bit more clear and easy to quantify progress towards them. Next slide, please. So we also estimated some future scenarios, and we can see that the number of people exposed to levels of noise harmful to health remains high and it's likely to increase. Next slide, please. So in the graph, you can see the outlooks for 2020 and 2030, and the percentage increase in number of people exposed per each source. And these were scenarios done before the COVID pandemic, and therefore these scenarios may change with the current situation. So just something to be aware of. Next slide, please. So to model these scenarios, we took into account demographic and transport forecasts. So for urban road traffic, we modeled the scenario assuming a 50% electrification of the fleet in 2030. And we also took into account the new regulations on silent freight rail. And for aircraft, we took into account the EASA-based traffic forecast. We see that following the scenario model, it appears that the number of people exposed to harmful levels of noise would not decrease because the number of people exposed to the most prevalent sources is projected to increase. And this is because it was projected that there will be an urban growth and an increase in mobility demand. As you can see for road traffic in urban areas, a 50% electrification of the fleet would not really bring an overall reduction of people exposed to noise. And the same for railway. The silent freight policies are reducing the number of people exposed, but because there is an increase in traffic and freight is a small percentage of the total railway traffic, that doesn't bring the overall numbers down. Next slide, please. So apart from monitoring and reducing noise exposure, it is also important to preserve quiet areas. Quiet areas are places that are currently unaffected by noise from any traffic noise source or unwanted sources of noise. The Environmental Noise Directive recognizes the need to protect these areas, and it is important to conserve quiet areas because having access to quiet and green areas, as well as having, for example, one quiet site in the house, has shown to reduce annoyance due to noise and has some restorative effects. So we did an exploratory analysis in some cities to see the availability of quiet areas. So the areas not affected by road, rail, aircraft noise above 55 decibel LDN, and that had green land cover. And we see that in most of the cities analyzed, a big percentage of the population does not have access to green and quiet areas, despite the fact that these areas exist. But generally, these are located far away from walking distance from the people. Next slide, please. So we looked at the action plans that are submitted under the END and which describe the plan actions to be taken in the next 5 years. From the action plans, we see that the different competent authorities are undertaking a variety of actions to reduce and manage noise. And as you can see, the type of measure employed depends on the noise source. For instance, the actions more used for roads are path measures, such as noise barriers or building insulation, whilst for railways or airports, the most reported measures are measures at the source. For instance, in the case of railway measures at the source, that are the most reported measures, are measures at the rail track or the use of silent brakes. However, there is no way to track whether these plans that are reported under the END have been implemented, and it is difficult also to evaluate the benefits of these actions in terms of positive health outcomes, because data on reduction of people exposed to noise from the actions is generally not reported in the action plan summaries. And another thing to say here is that many of the measures employed to tackle especially road traffic noise in urban areas are also beneficial for reducing air pollution. So we see here that a way to increase the impact of noise mitigation measures while optimizing costs and efforts could be the design of combined strategies for mitigating noise and air pollution. Next slide, please. And here you can see the measures generally reported for railways. Measures at source are extensively used to reduce and manage railway noise. Other measures such as urban and land use planning represent a small percentage of the measures chosen to address noise. And one thing to highlight here is that it seems that education and communication measures are not very used measures to manage railway noise exposure, as opposite for the other source, or at least these measures are not really captured in these action plan summaries. And next slide, please. And finally, in the new WHO noise guidelines, as well as in the 7th EAP, there were some recommendations in terms of reducing and managing noise exposure. And from the action plan summaries submitted by countries, we identified some areas that need improving. So we think that more work needs to be done on conserving quiet areas, also informing and involving communities, promoting interventions that improve health rather than just reducing decibels, and also improvements in city design, urban planning to reduce noise. Next slide, please. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much. And here in the last slide, I put some also further information in case you are interested.